If you live in the West, you know Samsung as a rival. It's the Android to your iPhone. It's a flat-screen TV in your living room, maybe a washing machine. It is a brand. A massive one, sure, but just a brand. But if you live in South Korea, Samsung is not a brand. It is a terrifyingly complete ecosystem that surrounds you from the moment you take your first breath until the moment you take your last. Picture this. You are born in a Samsung medical center. You are brought home to an apartment complex built by Samsung C and T. As you grow up, you attend a Samsung-owned university. You pay your tuition with a credit card issued by Samsung Finance. You drive a car made by a Samsung subsidiary. You cheer for the Samsung Lions baseball team on the weekends. And when you die, your body is taken to a Samsung funeral parlor where your family pays for the service using Samsung life insurance. This isn't a dystopian sci-fi novel. This is life for millions of people in the Republic of Korea, or, as the locals cynically call it, the Republic of Samsung. How does one family-owned company end up controlling 20% of an entire nation's GDP? How do they hold more power than the president? And what happens to the human soul when a corporation becomes the state? To understand the monster, you have to look at who fed it. In the 1950s, South Korea wasn't the neon-soaked high-tech capital of the world. It was rubble. The Korean War had flattened the peninsula. The country was poorer than sub-Saharan Africa. People were starving. There was no industry, no hope, and no future. Enter General Park Chung-hee. In 1961, Park seized power in a military coup. He was a dictator, brutal, efficient, and obsessed with one thing: modernization at any cost. He looked at the economy and decided that the only way to lift Korea out of the dirt was to pick winners. He didn't want a free market. He wanted industrial titans. So, the government selected a handful of family-owned businesses, clans really, and gave them everything. Unlimited cheap loans, protection from foreign competition, the right to suppress labor unions. These chosen families were called the Chaebols, Hyundai, LG, SK, and the biggest of them all, Samsung. The deal was simple. The government said, "We will make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. In exchange, you will build this country." And they did. It was called the Miracle on the Han River. In a single generation, South Korea went from exporting wigs and dried fish to exporting semiconductors and ships. It was an economic marvel that the world had never seen. But miracles aren't free. The price was a blood pact between the government and the Chaebols. A pact that effectively said, the law applies to you, the citizens. It doesn't apply to them. Today, the Samsung Group is an empire that makes the Medicis look like small-town grocers. But here's the trick. Samsung isn't one company. It's a tangled web of dozens of affiliates. Insurance, construction, heavy industries, biopharmaceuticals, advertising, amusement parks. And sitting at the center of this web is the Lee family. Now, you might think, well, if they own the company, they must own the majority of the stock. No, that's the genius of the Chaebol structure. The Lee family actually owns a tiny percentage of the total shares. But they use a complex system of circular shareholding. Company A owns Company B, which owns Company C, which owns Company A, to maintain absolute dictatorial control with very little of their own money at risk. They are the royalty of South Korea. And like any royalty, they are treated as untouchable. In 2008, the chairman of Samsung, Lee Geun-hye, was convicted of tax evasion and breach of trust. He hid billions of dollars in secret accounts. In any other country, or for any other citizen, this is prison time. But Lee was the king. The government panicked. They worried that if he went to jail, the economy would collapse. So, the president of South Korea pardoned him, Why? The official reason given was so that Lee Geun-hye could remain a member of the International Olympic Committee and help Korea bid for the Winter Olympics. Think about that. A convicted felon was pardoned, not because he was innocent, but because the country needed his brand recognition. But that was just the warm-up act. In 2016, the Republic of Samsung facade cracked wide open. This is a story that sounds too stupid to be true. It involves the president of South Korea, Park Geun-hye, the daughter of the dictator who started this whole system, and her involvement in a shamanistic cult. It turned out the president was being manipulated by a cult leader's daughter, who was demanding tens of millions of dollars from the Chaebols in exchange for government favors. And who was right there, checkbook in hand? Lee Jae-yong, the vice chairman of Samsung, the heir to the throne. He needed the government to approve a controversial merger between two Samsung affiliates. This merger was crucial, not for the business, but to ensure the Lee family kept control of the empire during a succession transfer. It actually hurt regular shareholders. It hurt the pension funds of Korean workers. But Lee paid the bribes. He bought the president. When the news broke, millions of South Koreans flooded the streets. It was the candlelight revolution. They held signs that read, "Arrest the Chaebol heads." They managed to impeach the president. Lee Jae-yong was arrested. He was put on trial. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. It felt like a turning point. Finally, the law was coming for the kings. But remember the pattern. He served less than a year before an appeals court suspended his sentence. He walked free. Later, he was sent back to prison for a retrial, only to be pardoned again by a new president in 2022. The Justice Ministry explicitly stated the reason: to help overcome the national economic crisis. The message was clear. Samsung is not a business contained by South Korea. South Korea is a country contained by Samsung. So, what happens to the people living inside the corporation? You might think that living in a rich, high-tech nation built by corporate giants is a paradise. But walk the streets of Seoul at night, and you feel a different energy. There is a term young Koreans use to describe their country: Hell Joseon. It refers to an old feudal dynasty where you were born into your class and could never escape it. Because the Chaebols suck up so much of the economy, there is very little room for anyone else. If you are a young student in Korea, you have one goal: get into a top university so you can get a job at a Chaebol. That is the only path to security. The competition is so fierce, so soul-crushing, that students study 16 hours a day. They don't sleep. And if you don't make it, if you don't get that Samsung ID badge, you are often treated as a failure. This pressure has created a new demographic, the Sampo Generation. Sampo means giving up 3 things: courtship, marriage, and children. They are giving them up because they can't afford them. They can't afford the Samsung apartment. They can't afford the tuition. They are on strike against their own future. South Korea currently has the lowest fertility rate in the world. It is a nation literally dying out. It also has one of the highest suicide rates in the developed world. The Mapo Bridge in Seoul is famous for 2 things: the beautiful view of the corporate skyscrapers that line the river, and the number of people who jump off it. Samsung recently announced record profits. Their chips are in every phone. Their screens are brighter than ever. The GDP is up. But the people who built that GDP, the grandparents who worked in the factories for Park Chung-hee, and the grandchildren now studying until their eyes bleed, are asking a question that the spreadsheets can't answer. Is a country a place where people live? Or is it just a business model? In the Republic of Samsung, the customer is always right. But the citizen is just another resource to be managed. And the scariest part? When Lee Jae-yong walked out of prison wearing a dark suit and a mask, he didn't look like a defeated criminal. He looked like a CEO returning from a long lunch break. He bowed to the cameras, apologized for causing concern, and got into his limousine. He went straight to the Samsung headquarters. The stock price went up.